Listen, a sower went out to sow. Take my lips and speak through them. Take our ears and hear through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire with love for thee. May I speak in the name of the living God.
Amen.
When I was preaching in an empty chapel during COVID, it felt as fruitless and ineffective as shouting into the wind. I felt self-conscious and ridiculous. There was no response at all, no heads nodding, no voices chuckling, no faces sharply listening. If it hadn't been for my husband with the camera, wherein I imagined you, who I was only just getting to know, I'd have died from the sheer absurdity and loneliness of it, week after week, shaping a life-giving message to the best of my ability for people I had only been with 7 weeks and could not see, in a context that frightened us all. The chapel's full name is St. Columba's the Berkeley Memorial Chapel. It was named for Anglican Bishop George Berkeley, or Barclay, the philosopher who asked the famous question, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? Bishop Barclay's answer was yes, because God hears it, which frankly is a great consolation to me as a preacher, because God hears me even if no one else does. Audience of one. But Jesus wants more. He wants us to listen. He wants us to hear. And not only to hear, but to have our lives changed. I don't know if I've told you over and over or just the Bible study group over and over, but the story of Lee Iacocca, the chairman of Chrysler, comes to mind. He made these appealing ads for Chrysler back in the day. And the story was of a young man who was exiting the elevator while the chairman was entering. "Oh, Mr. Iacocca," said the young man, "I love your ads." "Thank you," said Mr. Iacocca. And as the elevator doors were closing, he asked, "What kind of car do you drive?" The intention behind Lee Iacocca's ads, my preaching Jesus' parable, is not making a good ad or giving a good sermon or telling a compelling story. The intention is to change the lives of the listeners. So here's Jesus this morning. He's in a boat on the Sea of Galilee, speaking to a crowd gathered on the shore in a kind of makeshift amphitheater. Listen, he says, drawing our attention from the very first word to his whole point. Listen, the sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the road where the earth was packed as hard as pavement by pounding feet, and the birds came and ate them. Others fell in shallow soil, so they sprang up quickly, but the underlying rock shelf, which is common in Israel, stopped the roots from growing deep enough to survive being scorched by the sun. Other seeds fell among thorns, he means weeds, that choked them. And some fell in good soil, yielding an exponential harvest, 100-fold, 60-fold, 30-fold. Let anyone with ears listen. This is the beginning of Jesus preaching outdoors in Matthew's gospel, not just in the synagogues. And from here on, he only speaks to the crowds in parables. The disciples ask him why, and he tells them something we all know, that people hear only what they're prepared to hear. If they're prepared to hear talk of revolution and insurrection, they'll hear it. If they're prepared to find that Jesus is, overrated and irrelevant, they'll hear it. And we are no strangers to polarized, hard soil, non-listening in our own day. We call this the parable of the sower, but judging by Jesus' own description of it, we could have called it the parable of the soils, because he uses it to focus our attention on the quality of the listening. Jesus wants people to listen, as he says in his very first word. And to do that, he finds a way to put the truth before them in a way that doesn't immediately raise either their hackles or their defenses. He tells stories, parables, earthly stories with a heavenly meaning. Using parables, Jesus makes us curious about how this familiar, well-known thing is more than it appears. Leaven in a loaf, a shepherd with a lost sheep, a bridesmaid's lamp running out of oil. Parables don't confront us head on. They come at us slant, and they lodge in our memories, and we find ourselves turning them over and over in our minds like a spade turns over soil. And as we do, the ground of our heart softens. Today's parable is happening in real time, both for Jesus and his listeners and for me and mine. Right now, this parable is bouncing off the heads of some people who are thinking, what is this nonsense? Throwing seeds everywhere is nowhere to farm. What a waste of time. People who are packed too tight, whether from arrogance or pride or anxiety or fear, are people who don't want to be turned over, to use gardening terms. They don't want to be broken open. They want things to stay the way they are. We may not be aware that we're hard-packed soil, but sometimes we are. The seed bounces, the birds come. Jesus says the evil one comes and snatches it away. Then there are the people caught up in the excitement of the moment. Jesus speaks and possibilities beckon. But it's one thing to hear about love, and it's another thing to do it. These people are planted in shallow soil, says Jesus. The seed springs up quickly, but it has no root. And as soon as trouble comes on account of the word, that it calls for patience or generosity or self-control, all bets are off. This is when we come out of church uplifted and fight in the car all the way home. Enthusiasm withers away, and there's nothing left to show. Then there are those who hear the word, but the soil is choked by thorns, what Jesus calls the cares of the world and the lure of wealth. God looks good until other things look better. The dopamine ping of our iPhones ring. Our plans for our lives, our jobs, our families, ourselves, God is there, but pushed to the back. We believe in God, but function as atheists, as if everything depends on us. The seed yields nothing. The seed that falls on good earth is the person who is receptive to God. They hear the word and understand it. They turn toward God like a flower toward the sun, and their lives produce a harvest beyond their wildest dreams, 100-fold, 60-fold, 30-fold more than could be expected, because with God, there is always more. What kind of soil are you? Am I? What kind of soil do we want to be? Saints, hearing is urgent business. You know that prayer that I pray before preaching. Take my lips and speak through them. Take our ears and hear through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire with love for thee. I have been praying that prayer so long I don't even know where it comes from anymore. But it was a parishioner 20 years ago who made me hear it with a new appreciation. She said to me, "You are the only preacher I have ever heard who prays for our hearing as well as your speaking. As if our listening were as important as your speaking. And saints, oh my goodness, it is. It truly, truly is. We tend to assume, because the initiative is with the speaker, that what is spoken is the most important thing. And the sower is important. The sower in this parable is Jesus, abundantly, profligately, eternally sowing and showering us with seeds. But today, Jesus focuses our attention on the soil, on the importance of the quality of the listening. It was clear to Jesus that if he was to reap a full harvest for the kingdom, he had to quicken his listeners to self-examination, had to cause them to consider how they listen. If they listen. To ask what gets in the way of their listening and to root it out. Jesus is trying to break us open in this parable of the soils, because speaking only goes as far as hearing allows. Speaking only goes as far as hearing allows. It's not a great preacher that makes a great church. A preacher is only as effective as his or her listeners. It's the listeners who enable the word to come to fruition 100-fold, 60-fold, 30-fold. It's great listeners to God who make a great church. Barclay's right. God hears, even if no one else does. But imagine what could happen if everybody did. Let anyone with ears listen. Amen.
Amen.